Let 'em Eat Space by William Gray Beyer. Part 1. Just a few plush-lined seats left on the spaceship. Folks, and well worth scrambling for. Today's excursion takes us to Propos, where shadows eat rabbits and you meet the nicest, wackiest people found on any planet. Chapter 1. Don't let Mr. Montgomery, first Vice President of Interplanetary Insurance Incorporated, was gazing in a severe and somewhat disapproving manner over the upper rim of his horn-rimmed spectacles. Across the polished desk fidgeted Mr. Ham Eggles, small and dapper, and Mr. Slim Winters, tall, thin, and unkempt. Ham, with a small portion of his mind, was wondering what would happen if Mr. Montgomery ever should happen to look through those specs. By far the greater part of his gray matter, however, was engaged in pleasant contemplation of the charms of a certain barmaid of his acquaintance. Slim, on the other hand, was a man who invariably concentrated on the matter at hand. He was busy worrying why the boss had summoned them. Mr. Montgomery cleared his throat. "I suppose," he said, "that you gentlemen are familiar with the phenomenon of metabolism." Ham looked at Slim, and Slim looked at Ham. "Why, sure," they chorused, then abruptly fell into an embarrassed silence. "Yes, of course," said Mr. Montgomery dryly. "I knew also after I had consulted a dictionary, but I'll save you that trouble. Metabolism is the process of building up and breaking down of tissues and cells in living organisms. It constitutes the vital chemical processes of life itself." His audience revealed by facial expression that it had heard of some such thing back in its school days. "Now that you thoroughly understand the subject," continued the boss, "you will probably be interested to know that it has slowed up." "What has?" queried Ham absently. "Metabolism, you rum-soaked Casanova," supplied Slim. "This fact came to us as a result of diligent investigation on the part of our research department," said Mr. Montgomery, ignoring the byplay. "We have been deluged with industrial claims that have been pouring in from all over the solar system. This unexpected departure from normal began in the spring of 2074, over a year ago. We have traced the cause of most of the accidents to a lack of alertness and agility on the part of the victims. Workers are no longer able to keep up with their machine. All sorts of things have been happening. Men are getting their hands taken off in punch presses. Airplanes are making poor landings. Bus drivers are getting in accidents, trying to make their schedule. In short, wherever men are engaged in work with machines, which are normally geared to keep pace with human ability, they are having trouble." Mr. Montgomery leveled an accusing finger. "It has also come to light that men engaged in sound research in connection with the cinema and radio industries have found that women who formerly sang soprano are now baritones, and men who were baritones are now making sounds far below the audible range of normal hearing, and yet the ear has failed to detect any change. With these facts to work on, we soon discovered that the reason for the condition lies in the fact that metabolism has slowed up. Further investigation has proven that all life in the solar system has been similarly affected. To sum up the situation, life has been slowed down to a crawl, and we must do something about it." He emphasized his words with a resounding thump on the desk with a balled fist. Slim and Ham were looking slightly bewildered by this time, for metabolism, a purely biological business, was entirely out of their scope. Slim hesitantly advanced this information. "I'm coming to that," said the boss. "As I mentioned, we must do something about this deplorable situation. For although the company has weathered the storm of claims, and keeping in mind that mankind is becoming accustomed to the slower rate of metabolism, we have no assurance that the thing may not occur again. We could scarcely hope to retain our solvency if that happened. Now, and then, too," he added, "as an afterthought of little consequence, mankind might not survive another such drastic change. But to continue, our research workers have further discovered that concurrent with the deluge of accident claims, certain scientists reported a sharp decrease in the amount of cosmic rays which reach the solar system. The inference is obvious. that the rate of metabolism is directly dependent upon intensity of cosmic rays absorbed by the living being. And there, the boss concluded, is where you gentlemen enter the picture. It is your job to determine the cause of the decreased density of these rays. Hannam remained in a state of bewilderment, at least that portion of his mind which was not lingering on the aforementioned bondmaid. The problem of the cosmic rays seemed as remote from his field as had the matter of metabolism, for he and Slim were not engaged by the company as scientists or research workers, but rather as detectives, confining their activities to doubtful claims in various parts of the solar system. But where Ham failed to see the connection, Slim apparently grasped the idea immediately. You mean interstellar space? Precisely. Cosmic rays originate far outside the solar system, and you'll have to follow them if you intend to learn anything. Our experts will give you all the necessary information. Your ship is equipped with the most modern of gravity drives, capable of many times the speed of light. The latest space warp principle will be incorporated into the design of the drive. That will take only a few days. You are to use it, of course, only after you are well out of the system. Chapter 2. Somewhat less than a week later, a silvery torpedo may have been seen flashing past the outermost planet of the solar system. But if it was seen at all, it couldn't have been observed for any great length of time, for shortly after passing the orbit of the most distant rampart of Old Sol, the ship surpassed the speed of light itself, immediately becoming invisible to any observer in the rear of its line of flight. Ham was staring contentedly ahead into the void, through which they were rushing with such speed that the light of the stars ahead was of a decided bluish tinge, when a frown came to mar his usual serenity of countenance. I know it's none of my business, he complained to Slim, but if it's not too much to ask, just where the heck are we headed for? The elongated one lifted his eyes momentarily from a sheaf of astronomical charts and grunted, Ite Geminorum Propus. Never heard of it, remarked Ham, returning to his star-gazing. A Cepheid variable of the long-period variety, informed Slim, has a period of 231.4 days, during which it varies in magnitude from 3.2 to 4.2. Ham continued staring for several minutes before his placidly preoccupied mind digested this. Slim was always babbling miscellaneous bits of information, interesting to him at the moment, and Ham had developed the faculty of completely ignoring him, especially when he had something on his own mind. But when the intelligence did finally sink in, he snapped to attention. That's quite a ways out, isn't it? He asked. Is that where the cosmic ray experts said we'd find the trouble? Slim slowly uncoiled himself, deserting the charts, and rose to creakily stretch his great length. He was about 6 feet 6, and so thin that Ham always insisted that he had to stand still for at least 5 minutes to cast a visible shadow. That's what they said, little one, affirmed Slim. I should think you'd take more interest in these minor details. You've been acting as if this little jaunt were in the nature of a pleasure trip. It probably is. I don't see what we can do about it, anyway. We didn't even know we had slowed up until old Specs on the Nose told us, and neither does anybody else. By the time we get back, people will be completely adjusted to the slower rate of metabolism, or the machines will be adjusted, which amounts to the same thing. I can't see where the matter is of any great importance. You can't, eh? Suppose the thing happens again. Suppose the rays decrease until metabolism is slowed down to about 1/3. Humanity would be very likely to suffer a fatal attack of indigestion. Patiently, Slim explained. In the normal operation of the human body, a series of complicated chemical processes are constantly in progress. And then the whole works would be thrown out of kilter by such a drastic departure from the proper speed of anabolism and catabolism. You certainly know a lot of words, Ham commented, not greatly concerned by the dire prospect. But what has all that to do with this variable star we're heading for? Slim chuckled. Ham's question took a lot more words to answer. Look, he said, It's believed that the cause of the decreased cosmic ray intensity lies somewhere in the vicinity of that star. Science has long been aware that the rays are sent out by every one of the Cepheid variables. Just why is not known, but the inference is that whatever force causes these peculiar stars to pulsate also generates the rays in enormous quantities. It has been observed that the short-period Cepheids appear to emit a greater number of rays. Of these, Zeta Geminorum is about the most active. On the other hand, the long-period variables gives off very few of the rays, all but one, and that's the one we're going to investigate. Propus, unbelievably, has always furnished the solar system with as great an intensity of cosmic rays as all of the other variables put together. And now, practically overnight, Propus diminishes its output to a point comparable with other long-period variables of similar size. Unbelievable, mocked Ham. Don't be so darned flippant, exclaimed Slim, somewhat exasperated. The fate of humanity is at stake if the thing should go any further. Not according to what you told me, said Ham. The solar system is receiving its present diminished supply from the other Cepheids, and is managing to get along just the same. The mysterious decrease from Propus isn't likely to be repeated over such a widely scattered area. My deduction is that the tremendous output from that star was an unstable phenomenon, and something happened to restore it to normal. Logical, what? Lynn clasped and unclasped his hands several times, meanwhile looking very thoughtful. He then grunted eloquently and sat down to resume study of the star charts. While you're looking at those road maps, Ham suggested, see if you can find if our shrinking violet has any planets, and if so, how big. Slim grunted again, riffled the charts, and picked out the desired one. The best telescope ever developed couldn't see a planet small enough for us to stand up on at that distance. The chart shows one planet about the size of Jupiter, and notes that there are probably 4 more. Maybe one of them will be our size. The chart maker turned out to be a fairly accurate guesser. The travelers were able to spot 4 satellites of the pulsating luminary, including the one shown on the map. It was altogether possible that there was 1 or 2 more, either extremely distant from their sun or a very low albedo. But they weren't greatly interested in the possibility, for their attention was immediately attracted to the second world in the system, approximately 9,000 miles in diameter. It gave off a bluish-green light, similar to that of the Earth, when seen from a proximity of a few million miles. The resemblance decided them. They would land. If intelligent life was to be found in the system, this seemed the most likely place to find it. Slim was on fire with the thought that he might be able to communicate with the denizens of this planet and learn from them the reason for their sun's peculiar actions. As the ship approached, the planet's resemblance to Earth became even more marked. There were mighty oceans, vast forests, and even greater areas of arid desert. The proportion of water to land was somewhat less, indicating greater age, but it was still a fair substitute for Mother Earth. There's one thing missing, Slim noticed. Cities, supplied Ham. I've been looking for them. Wait till we get closer. Maybe they don't live in cities. Maybe they don't. And then again, maybe there aren't any they, but there were. As the ship neared the planet, it became evident that some sort of a civilization was flourishing below them. Scattered widely over the surface of this world were hundreds of large buildings of peculiar construction. There seemed to be no system to their distribution, for they were situated in the most unusual spots, invariably dome-shaped, and of a grayish-white color. The structures were just as likely to be seen in the middle of a desert, or perched precariously on the side of a mountain, as in a more conventional position. Look at that one, Slim pointed, tilted on its edge and half buried in the side of that hill. Looks like the inhabitants of this sphere are among the dear departed, Ham guessed. It's a cinch they didn't build those things in such dizzy places. More likely they've been there for thousands of years, and the topography of the land has altered. I guess so, admitted Slim gloomily. They weren't built for human use anyway. I haven't seen a window or door in any of them. Well, let's land, get into one of them, and take some pictures. It was several minutes before they decided on one of the structures situated in a desirable spot. The one selected lay almost in the center of a broad grassy plain, and they picked it because a clear view was to be had for miles in all directions. If there happened to be any dangerous animal life on the planet, they wouldn't be caught unaware. The ship landed about 100 yards from the curious structure. Slim turned off the gravity controls, and they took a few cautious steps. Don't notice any difference, Ham remarked. Should be heavier. Maybe this planet is composed of lighter materials. Slim hazarded, busy with the analysis of a sample of the outside air. You can't always depend on size. Look at that little baby that balances Sirius. Smaller than the Earth and heavier than the sun. You look at it. How's the air? Piped Ham. 19% oxygen and 3% carbon dioxide. The rest is helium, except for small quantities of some of the rarer gases found in our atmosphere. Pressure, about 17 pounds. Ought to be breathable, decided Ham. Bring the torch. He released the latches on the inner airlock door, while Slim produced the torch from a locker. The outer door followed, and in a minute they had jumped to the ground and were breathing the air of the new planet. They wasted no time looking around them, but set out immediately to cover the short distance to the hive-like building. Slim was carrying the torch, with which they intended to burn their way inside. Ham was lugging a camera and a few dozen flashbulbs. They were about halfway to the structure when involuntarily both stopped dead in their tracks. Chapter 3. I thought that was a rock, exclaimed Ham, gazing in consternation at an object slightly to the right of their path. Well, so you don't sense. The object, about 3 feet in diameter and smoothly rounded, when they first sighted it, was now about 5 feet long and as thick through as Ham's thigh. Looks more like a worm to me, said Slim judiciously, except that it's brown, although that could be suntan. Which end is which? Inquired Ham. Neither. A worm's the same on each end. You have to wait until it moves, and even then you might be fooled. It might be backing up, but it became immediately apparent that this system, admittedly unreliable, was less than useless in the case at hand, for the worm moved, and in a quite unpredictable manner. Its opposite sides bulged and kept bulging until it resembled a four-pointed starfish. It'll never get anywhere that way, was Ham's comment. Maybe it's not going anywhere. Maybe it wants to hear you make some more silly remarks. Come on. But suppose this is an intelligent creature, suggested Ham. Maybe we should try to communicate with it. Phooey! Ah, that's an amoeba-like animal, on the order of those creatures that infest the marshes of Venus. Except for the healthy color and the larger size. They live sluggishly by ingesting nourishment from the grasses and other vegetation with which their bodies come in contact. Reproduce by fission. Well, you seem well acquainted around here, Ham murmured. But inasmuch as the strange creature seemed satisfied to retain his starfish shape, and made no further effort to be entertaining, Ham decided that Slim was probably right, and the two resumed their former course. They had taken only a few steps when they were again brought up short. They both distinctly heard the word, wait. They looked at each other, each thinking for a brief instant that the other had spoken. Then the answer dawned on them. It was the worm. Slim, exclaimed. You mean the amoeba-like creature, corrected Ham sarcastically. Which is correct, informed the starfish. My composition is very similar to the picture your mind gives me of the amoeba. The two voyagers looked incredulously at the astounding creature. Their astonishment was due to the fact that they now realized the thing was causing the words to be formed in their minds, and making no audible sound while doing it. Such an accomplishment had often been imagined, and indeed it was believed that certain men had abilities in that direction, but neither had ever encountered the phenomenon, and the experience was eerie in the extreme. Did I hear you infer that you can read our minds? Slim finally queried. Not your ordinary thoughts, explained the amoeba. They are not strong enough to transmit themselves, but I do receive impressions when you speak, for the effort expended makes the waves strong. And of course I can make my own thoughts strong enough to impress them on your primitive minds. Slim turned to Ham. I think he's pulling our collective leg. What could be more primitive than an amoeba? But there's nothing primitive about telepathy. And I didn't say that I was an amoeba, corrected the creature. I merely said that I am similar to one. As a matter of fact, my people represent the evolution of that unicellular form carried out to the nth degree. Then you, personally, are not unicellular, deduced Ham. No more than you are. The starfish stretched forth one of its members for their examination. You will notice that my skin is of a rubbery nature and quite tangible and opaque. The unicellular creature is transparent, and the outer covering is so tenuous that it readily allows food and moisture to pass through. The amoeba, as such, is strictly limited as far as size is concerned. Its cell walls would break down from its own weight if it grew too much. So obviously I am constructed of many cells. Sounds reasonable, Slim admitted. But if your skin is so tough, how do you eat? Or don't you need nourishment? Again, one of the pseudopodia was thrust out, this time bottom side up. There were dozens of small openings on the underside of the member, some of them gaping and closing rhythmically, then shuddered involuntarily, for the whole thing looked very much like one of the arms of an octopus. Then, abruptly, all of the openings closed, and the rubbery texture of the skin became smooth and unbroken. I was only demonstrating, explained the evolved amoeba apologetically. The mouths are not there when I don't need them to admit food. Merely a multi-celled adaptation of a unicellular form. Even my brain is but the highly evolved replica of the nucleus of a primitive amoeba. If it's not too much to ask, ventured Han, do you have, concealed somewhere about your person, a pair of eyes? Nothing so complicated. Instead, I see with every nerve on the surface of my body. It is by far the most simple and efficient visional apparatus, for I can see in all directions. All the nerve ends are sensitive to light. Amazing, claimed Ham. But how about, wait a minute, Slim broke in. We're forgetting what we came here for. Maybe this gent knows the answer. But before either man could put the question to the amoeba, a feeling of acute alarm swept into their consciousness with such intensity that both cringed, as if threatened with instant extinction. They knew that the sensation was caused by a similar feeling in their new acquaintance, but it was none the less real. Run! Run! Shrilled the next mental message. And run they did. There was no time wasted in looking about for danger. Too many times in the course of their interplanetary wanderings they had been in spots where instant flight was the only means of survival. They did not hesitate now, but before they had covered half the distance to the spaceship, an unseen blow from behind knocked them flat. Scrambling wildly to their feet, they fairly flew the rest of the way. As they were about to leap for the edge of the airlock, Ham let out a yelp as he was again knocked down, this time more forcibly than before. But Slim made the jump, lithely pulled his lanky body up, and turned in time to lend the other a hand. Ham, down again, let out a yelp, but Slim made the jump in time and turned to lend a hand. Slamming the outer door, after hurriedly noting that the amoeba was nowhere to be seen, they stood panting and trembling. Finally Ham, having caught his breath, chuckled at the ludicrous expression of fright on Slim's face. Funny, eh? Slim panted. Ah, I suppose you know what it's all about. What knocked us down, and what became of our pal? Come on, let me in on it. Ham sobered and looked out of the nearest port. An empty plain stretched in all directions. Empty, that is, except for the mysterious building and the camera, flash bulbs, and torch which they had dropped when ordered to run. There was no sign of their recent acquaintance, the high-evolved amoeba. I've sort of run out of ideas, he admitted shakily. It was a full hour later, and almost a full quart of Scotch whiskey later, when Slim again voiced wonderment at the creature's strange absence from the landscape. I wonder what became of Jasper, said he. Ham dwelt sadly on this mystery as he poured out the last of the Scotch. For several minutes the silence was broken only by the occasional liquid gurgle of a trickle of hay in hay, passing an unsteady epiglottis. Both men were mourning the disappearance, but for different reasons. Slim's mind was wholly filled with the lost opportunity for gaining some knowledge of the strange behavior of Probus. His friend had conceived a genuine, if slightly alcoholic. "He seemed such a friendly sort of a critter," said Ham half tearfully. "No harm in him at all. And so darned willing to oblige," supplemented Slim. "He was willing to tell all, if we had only been given time to ask him. And not only that," enlarged Ham, striding uncertainly toward one of the ports, "but he wasn't impolitely asking us a bunch of questions about our origin. And he must have been very curious about it, too, say." He broke off, attracted by something outside. "Come here, quick!" Slim bounded to his feet, almost folded up, but managed to reach the bullet-like window. He arrived just in time to see a small rabbit, or something that looked like a rabbit, come to an untimely end. The animal had been chased and overtaken by a shadow. At least it had seemed to be a shadow while it was in motion, but now as it stopped and engulfed the rabbit in its indefinable blackness, it looked more like a hole in the ground. It was impossible to focus the eyes on the thing. Slim blinked several times, thinking of the pernicious effects of alcohol on the optic nerve, but was still unable to determine anything about the blob of darkness, other than the fact that it appeared to be about the size of the vanished creature he had called Jasper. "I'll bet that's the jigger that bowled us over," he finally said, turning to Ham, who was futilely trying to coax a few more drops from the bottle. "Wouldn't be surprised," sighed Ham, returning to the port for another look. "What do you think we should? Hey, it has went. What became of it?" Slim again looked out, but saw nothing of the shadow and no sign of the unfortunate rabbit, if that's what it was. He explained patiently that he had no part in the phenomenon, and that the shadow had certainly been there when he looked away, and followed this intelligence with the suggestion that inasmuch as Probus was getting ready to set, it might be a good idea if they both sought relief from the harrowing memories of the day's happenings by catching a little sleep. And, with a solemn gravity reminiscent of the bottle, agreed wholeheartedly. Tomorrow, he averred, was another day. Tomorrow, indeed, was another day. Although as events progressed, it turned out to be quite as harrowing as the one it followed. It was a good 12 hours after the setting of Probus that the first ruddy rays of the morning entered a port and moved to the point where they shone directly on Ham's face. He opened slitted eyes, sat erect, and groaned. But there was no time for him to collect his sense and realize to the fullest how terrible he felt, for a diversion occurred immediately. The light which had awakened him was shut off abruptly, and quite startled, he got up to investigate. The port in question was a good 10 feet above the ground, and the ship was still situated in the middle of a treeless plain. That he was startled is easy to understand, for nothing except a cloud which would have made the light dim gradually should have been there to cast that shadow. Uneasy thoughts of the rabbit-killing menace of the night before coursed through his head as he peered through the little window. "Good morning," greeted a familiar voice. "It's Jasper," he muttered incredulously, and then he saw the obstruction. It was indeed Jasper, and that personage was hovering, quite nonchalantly, as if such doings were a regular thing with him, which, of course, was altogether possible, a short distance above the window. "I don't wish to disturb you," came the emanation, "but will you please let me come inside?" Ham thought he detected a note of urgency in the message. He seemed to be experiencing, in a slighter degree, the same feeling of horror and fear that had preceded the attack of the day before. He made record time of opening the airlock, admitting the amoeba, who floated eerily past him, and shutting it again. "I was afraid you wouldn't awake in time," said Jasper, gently settling to the floor. "I was about to be attacked by one of the mad ones. Why didn't you wake us? Your thoughts seem to penetrate the walls of the ship easily enough. Oh, I wouldn't have considered it. We Jaspers are very considerate of each other's privacy." Chapter 4. Ham's slightly bloodshot eyes widened, perceptibly. Slim had referred to the amoeba by that name Jasper, not knowing his real one, and now the critter had evidently accepted it for his own. No, that wasn't it. The amoeba hadn't used a name at all. He was using thoughts, and Ham's mind was automatically translating the thoughts into words, without even realizing it. And the word his mind had given him for the highly evolved amoeba and all of its kind was naturally the same one he had mentally been using to designate. Further deductive reasoning along those lines was abruptly interrupted by a minor explosion from the direction of Slim's bed. That gentleman had begun to squirm and thrash about as the sound of the conversation penetrated his dim consciousness. Suddenly he yelled in a fear-filled voice, "Get him off of me!" and sat up, looking a bit sheepish. "Must have been something I ate," he explained, looking with pleased surprise at Jasper. "What became of you last night? I rose in the air, out of harm's way. My people utilize the principle of levitation as a normal function of our bodies." "Amazing, if you'll remember," suggested Ham. "This is your week to get the meals. Suppose you break out the tomato juice while I converse with our guest. By the way, Jasper, is there anything my friend can prepare for you? I don't know whether our sort of food would agree with you." "Nothing, thank you. I have eaten my usual meal of grasses and require no more." "Well, in that case, let's get back to where we left off. You were about to be attacked by one of the mad ones. And what might they be?" "They are really Jaspers like myself," informed the guest, "except that they are changed in a horrible and irreversible way. I'll tell you about it. A few hundred years ago, there was a very adventuresome Jasper who wanted to explore into the outer gaseous envelope of our luminary. He protected himself with very strong walls of force surrounding his body and set out to do this very thing. For ordinary travel in space, he had taken more than sufficient precautions. For the force screen he set up about himself was several times the intensity of the ones we Jaspers had been using for millions of years. But never before had we undertaken to approach a sun closely, let alone actually enter one, and evidently there was something lacking in his screen, emitting an unknown vibration, for a peculiar mutation occurred in both brain and body. Jasper's thoughts appeared troubled for a moment before his discourse continued. This wasn't noticed for some time after his return, but when he divided, we followed the same lines of development as the unicellular creature in regards to division by fission. The effects became at once apparent. The two smaller beings became almost invisible, reflecting only the infrared vibrations and absorbing all the higher ones. They also became carnivorous, an unheard of thing, for we Jaspers respect the right of all living creatures to exist without interference. And to make this change even more horrible, the mad ones took to devouring their own brothers when they were unable to find other animal food. They are becoming quite a problem, for since the mutation occurred, they have multiplied at a much faster rate than normal Jaspers, and now number almost 1/10 of our population. And all of our ingenuity has failed to find a means of returning the mad ones to normal." Slim looked thoughtfully over the rim of his glass of tomato juice. "You mentioned brothers," he observed. "I can easily see how beings who reproduce as you do would all be brothers, or perhaps fathers or uncles. Is that why it has never occurred to you to exterminate these mad ones?" Jasper didn't answer immediately. Although he possessed no features with which to express emotion, it was evident that Slim's words had shocked him, and probably started a train of thought in an unexplored direction. "I can see that such a course would be natural to a race of beings who developed under a more competitive environment," he finally said. "But you must understand that such a thing would be abhorrent to my people. We have never known strife, not even mild competition. We have never been faced with the need for fighting with any of the myriad forms of life with which we have come in contact. Whenever a Jasper is attacked by a carnivorous life form, he merely rises and moves to a place where he is safe. So naturally, the instinct to kill when menaced has never been developed in us. You wouldn't even fight when you know that eventually these mad ones will multiply to the point where the planet will be uninhabitable for you? I'm afraid not. I know that I could not kill a mad one, even if he were eating me, and therefore no other Jasper could, for we are all alike. That certainly is a sad state of affairs, Slim commiserated, and it looks as if nothing we could think of would be of any help. We're too barbaric. Without any intention of offending, I'm afraid you are. And it is not likely that you could help solve the problem in the only way acceptable to us, that of correcting the mutation. For our civilization is millions of years older than yours, and we have spent that time profitably, not in war and strife, and so our minds are much better equipped to reason logically. Yet we have failed. Therefore, let us drop the subject and return to the point where we were interrupted yesterday. The two men looked blankly at each other. You were going to tell me what you came here for, supplied Jasper. You said, maybe this gent knows the answer. Slim grinned broadly and then proceeded to expound volubly on the solar system's metabolism trouble. We Jaspers were afraid of that, said the Amuba. Then you know what caused the phenomenon. Tell us. We caused it, admitted Jasper. In fact, we caused your race to come into existence, though of course we didn't plan it that way. I'll explain. Millions of years past, when the pulsations of our luminary were of much shorter duration, my race came into conscious existence. The property of levitation was ours even then, and to that gift is given credit for our rapid advancement in becoming sentient beings. For as we became larger and multi-shelled, we could avoid the terrible heat of our sun during its intense periods by flying through the air and continually night side of the planet. This enabled the race to continue its mental development, while lesser creatures were forced to go into periods of hibernation when the sun was hot, and spend all of their time stuffing themselves with food when the sun was cool. Our periods of flying became periods of study and mental communion, during which great advancement took place. Pardon me a moment, Slim interrupted. You mean that you flew for days at a time, keeping pace with the planet's rotation? Wouldn't that require a terrific amount of energy? Quite the contrary. Our levitation mechanism operates on the same principle as the gravity drive of your ship, and it takes almost no energy to maintain a warp in the gravitational lines of force of a planet. The chief difference lies in the fact that the mechanism is a normal bodily function with us. But to continue, as time went on and our population increased, it became apparent that new worlds would have to be found. At that time, our numbers were doubling, by division of course, every 100 years, and it was estimated that before another 10,000 years had passed, this planet would become uncomfortably crowded, and it was decided that we would choose, for the overflow, a world in some solar system where it would not be necessary continually to dodge the waxing periods of a pulsating sun.